It was late afternoon in Chicago, and the subway buzzed with the hurried shuffle of executives, students, mothers with shopping bags, and confused tourists. Thomas Rainer, owner of one of the largest educational tech networks in the country, walked alone along the Roosevelt Station platform, dressed in his usual dark suit and wearing headphones playing instrumental music. To most people there, he was just another man in a suit among many. But for Thomas, every step carried a silent weight, the weight of a loneliness that not even his fortune could erase. As the crowd waited for the next train, a sudden commotion broke the mechanical rhythm of the station. Shouts rang out, blending with the blare of the alarm and the hiss of the tracks. Instinctively, Thomas pulled out his earbuds and looked toward the rails. A small boy no more than 8 years old was stumbling near the edge of the platform, chasing a toy car that had fallen from his open backpack. The toy hit the tracks, and without thinking, the boy leaned over to retrieve it. Without stopping to think, driven purely by instinct, Thomas bolted toward the child. People gasped and stepped back in shock, but he dove forward, grabbing the boy by the waist at the exact moment the train rounded the bend. For one breathless second, there was absolute silence before the deafening screech of brakes filled the station, followed by nervous applause and sighs of relief. Thomas hit the ground with the boy in his arms, both of them panting. He looked the child over, no injuries, just a scare. The boy was trembling, but didn't cry. Instead, he stared up at Thomas with an oddly calm curiosity. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked, still on his knees. The boy nodded but didn't answer right away. His large, dark eyes locked onto Thomas's face, as if trying to decipher something that couldn't be spoken aloud. Then, still catching his breath, the boy asked in a soft voice, "Are you the man from my mom's photo?" The question caught Thomas completely off guard. He blinked, trying to process it. But before he could respond, a young woman came rushing through the crowd, breathless. "Lucas!" she cried, pulling the boy tightly into her arms. The woman, clearly shaken, gave a quick, breathy "Thank you, sir, thank you," and hurried away with the child. Thomas remained there, frozen for a few moments, as if the boy's question were still echoing through the muffled noise of the station. Something about that child, and that sentence, had awakened old memories, ones nearly buried. As he stood and adjusted his suit jacket, he didn't yet realize it, but that brief encounter had just altered the course of his life forever. Watching the mother and child disappear into the crowd, Thomas stayed rooted to the same spot on the platform, as though the world around him had sped up while he remained frozen in time. The boy's words rang in his mind with disturbing clarity. "Are you the man from my mom's photo?" How could that be possible? He didn't know anyone with kids, nor could he recall any recent connection that might tie him to a photograph. And yet, there was something in that child's eyes that unsettled him deeply. Even amid the usual chaos of the subway station, Thomas could still picture the boy's eyes, perfectly large, brown, alert, yet marked by a calmness beyond his years. There was no fear, only wonder and an eerie sense of recognition. It was as if the boy had seen something that made sense to him but would be incomprehensible to anyone else. And there was also the way he clutched the broken toy car to his chest, holding it as if it were a treasure, such a small detail, yet one that had unexpectedly captivated Thomas's attention. Back in his office hours later, Thomas couldn't focus on anything. The constant hum of elevators, the glow of screens, and the flickering stock numbers rising and falling all seemed meaningless next to that one lingering question. He replayed every detail of the encounter in his mind. The boy's loosely fitted red beanie, the torn gloves, the dirty sneakers, and those eyes. Then, as he opened the drawer of his desk to grab something for a headache, he stumbled upon something he hadn't seen in years. The only photograph he still kept from his childhood. It showed him at 8 years old, standing next to a smiling girl, their arms around each other beneath a tree in the orphanage yard. It was like a blade slicing through the fabric of time. A chill ran down Thomas's spine as he realized the girl in the photo, Maya, had eyes strikingly similar to the boys at the subway. And it wasn't just the eyes. He remembered a beaded bracelet Maya always wore, handmade and simple, yet filled with sentimental meaning. He hadn't thought about her in years. The idea that this child might somehow be connected to Maya, shook him so deeply that he dropped everything and left for home, guided by an impulse he couldn't explain or resist. On the way, he tried to rationalize what he was feeling. Was it just a coincidence? A child's innocent mistake? Or was fate, something he had long dismissed, reaching out to him again after all these years? The memory of Maya at the orphanage was one of the most vivid he had. She had been his only friend, the one who made him laugh on cold nights, who shared stolen sweets from the kitchen, who read to him under the blankets even when she didn't understand all the words. They had made a silent promise. They would never forget each other. But time pulled them apart, and he had never known what became of her. That night, lying in bed unable to sleep, Thomas looked once more at the old photograph. He ran his thumb slowly across the girl's face. "What if it's you?" he whispered to himself, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time in years, something stronger than logic took hold of him. A sweet, desperate restlessness settled over him, and he knew he couldn't just brush it aside. The question the boy had asked at the subway wasn't just a coincidence. It was a clue, and he was ready to follow it, even if it meant stepping back into a past he thought he had long left behind. The sun hadn't even risen when Thomas woke up with that same unshakable thought. He couldn't get that child out of his mind, and the sense that fate had sent him a sign only grew stronger with each passing minute. Sitting at the edge of his bed, he held between his fingers the old photograph he'd kept for so many years, forgotten in a drawer, a yellowed image, but vibrant with meaning. In it, he and a dark-haired girl smiled beneath a large oak in the orphanage yard, unaware of the heartaches the world held. It was the only photograph he had from that time, and, curiously, the only one he had never been able to throw away. Maya. Just whispering her name in silence made Thomas's stomach tighten. She had been his first friend, his first sense of family, and maybe though he hadn't understood it at the time, his first love. They had been inseparable at the orphanage. He could still remember the lightness of her laughter, the stories she made up to cheer him on sad days, and the encouraging words she offered when he cried in secret. Maya was a light in that dark place, and even after all those years, her face still lived in his memory with startling clarity. The week they were separated when he was adopted by a childless couple, she gripped his hand tightly and gave him a bracelet made of colorful beads. "It's so you won't forget me," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. He had promised he wouldn't, promised he'd come back for her. But life moved quickly. His adoptive parents relocated to another state. School, a new routine, the pressure to leave the past behind, all of it swept him away. He never heard from Maya again, and even when he tried to find her years later, he failed. The orphanage's records had been moved, names were changed, and his search ended in frustration. Now, decades later, everything seemed to be converging on that one moment. The boy at the subway with those eyes so much like Maya's, could he really be his son? The possibility scared him, yet it also pulled at him with an almost unbearable intensity. "Are you the man from my mom's photo?" It wasn't just a question. It was a key, a signal, a calling. For the first time in years, Thomas didn't want to be just the successful CEO of a billion-dollar company. He wanted to be the boy in the photo, the one who had a friend named Maya and a heart that still believed in reunions. Determined not to let that clue slip through his fingers, Thomas went to his personal study, where he kept boxes filled with old documents, childhood notebooks, clippings, and saved letters. He tore through everything with a childlike urgency, looking for any trace of Maya, her full name, a note, something that might lead him forward. He found a folded page, the handwriting uneven, scrawled in pencil on recycled paper. "If one day we get lost, look for me, because I'll remember you." Always. He read the sentence over and over, the emotion catching in his throat. That night, while the city carried on with its usual frantic rhythm, Thomas knew his routine would never be the same again. That forgotten chapter of his life no longer wanted to stay buried in the drawer. It was time to return to the past, not as a memory, but as a mission. Because maybe Maya had never truly left his life. Maybe, in some mysterious way, she was coming back with a new name, a child, and the same essence he had never forgotten. In the days following the encounter at the subway, Thomas dove headfirst into a silent investigation. He knew he wouldn't rest until he found out whether Maya was still alive, whether she was out there, and whether that boy he had saved was really his son. The methodical, rational executive had been replaced by a restless man, driven by memories he never thought he'd relive. The image of Maya as a teenager was still vivid in his mind, but now it blended with the face of the boy in the red beanie. The two felt connected by an invisible thread he was determined to follow. Thomas's first move was to call his trusted personal assistant, Clara. Without giving too many details, he asked her to track down any records from the orphanage where he'd spent his childhood adoption dates, names of former residents, especially a girl named Maya. Clara was puzzled by the unusual urgency, but she followed through. Within a few hours, she got back to him with a promising lead. The orphanage where he had once lived had closed in the 90s, but the records had been transferred to a social services agency on the south side of Chicago. Thomas didn't think twice. He scheduled a visit in person. The next morning, bundled in a dark wool coat and gloves, he arrived at the location. The place was cold, the hallways narrow, and the records stored in stacked cardboard boxes. An elderly staff member guided him to the records room and gently handed him a folder containing the names of children housed during his stay. His eyes scanned each line, his heartbeat quickening. When he found the name Maya Alvarez, his breath caught for a moment. There it was: full name, date of birth, and the note. Adopted in March 1993 by a family named Gutierrez. From there, the trail went cold with no current address, no phone number, only a single line, no further follow-up. Thomas snapped a photo of the document with his phone and rushed out of the building, walking quickly as if holding on to a spark that might fade at any second. He knew he needed more now: an address, a tangible lead. He reached out to an old and trusted friend, an investigative journalist with access to public databases. Within hours, his friend called back with another piece of the puzzle. A woman named Maya Alvarez Gutierrez, currently listed as a resident of a modest neighborhood on the north side of the city, working as a self-employed hairstylist. The name of the salon? Maya's Cuts. When Thomas heard that, he paused. The name was simple, almost childlike, but profoundly symbolic. He remembered how Maya, as a little girl, would cut her own hair with school scissors and dream out loud about owning her own salon one day. He had laughed back then. Now that memory carried weight. It was real. It was now. It was fate. And everything was about to converge in a way he never could have predicted. With the address in hand and his heart pounding, Thomas found himself facing a dilemma. What would he say when he saw her? How do you start a conversation after so many years, after such a long absence? What if she didn't recognize him? What if she was married, living a completely different life? And yet, something inside him, a mix of hope and longing, pushed him forward. Because some people, even when they vanish from sight, remain anchored in our hearts like a tether to time. And Maya was exactly that. An anchor, a bond that had never broken, only waited for the right moment to reappear. It was late afternoon when Thomas parked his car in front of the small barbershop tucked into an unassuming corner between a laundromat and a neighborhood grocery store. The sign, in turquoise cursive letters, read Maya's Cuts, with a chalk-drawn pair of scissors sketched on the window. The sidewalk outside was quiet, and the shop's humble exterior stood in stark contrast to the luxury Thomas was used to. Still, he sat for long minutes inside his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, as if gathering the courage to cross the threshold that separated him from decades of silence. Inside the barbershop, the walls were lined with old photographs in cheap frames, small spotted mirrors, and shelves filled with low-cost hair products. But what truly stood out was the warmth of the place. Not physical warmth, but human. Children waited for their haircuts. Regular clients chatted about the game from the night before, and a woman with a confident posture, her hair pulled back into a simple bun, was cutting an elderly man's hair. The boy from the subway, Lucas, sat in one of the chairs near the door, quietly coloring with a box of broken crayons. When Thomas walked in, the small bell above the door jingled with a metallic chime. Lucas looked up immediately. His eyes widened in recognition. "It's him, Mom," he murmured, already getting up from his seat. The woman paused mid-cut, then slowly turned around, and there she was. Maya. No longer the little girl from the orphanage, but a woman shaped by courage, scars, and silent battles. Her eyes locked with Thomas's, and time seemed to fold in on itself. No words were spoken. None were needed. The silence carried more emotion than any rehearsed phrase ever could. The client turned around, sensing the shift in atmosphere, and Maya, still holding the scissors, said gently, "Your haircut done, Mr. Joachim. You can take a look in the mirror." As the man got up to pay, Maya gave Thomas a small, discreet nod to wait. He sat quietly while Lucas returned to his seat, watching with wide-eyed curiosity. The boy looked at them like someone watching the beginning of a movie, as if he instinctively knew that something bigger was unfolding, something far beyond coincidence. Once the shop had emptied, Maya wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to him. Her steps were steady, but her eyes revealed the storm within. "You've changed a lot," she said with a half-smile. Thomas smiled too, unsure where to begin. "So have you, but not so much that I didn't recognize you." Maya lowered her gaze for a moment and took a deep breath. "I saw you at the subway. I saw when you saved my son. I wanted to say something, but so many years passed in just a few seconds. I froze." "He asked me if I was the man from the photo," Thomas said, almost in a whisper, "and all I could think of was you." Maya swallowed hard, her eyes welling for a moment, but she didn't let the tears fall. "He knows part of my story, at least the part one could share. He knows that when I was a little girl, there was a boy who made me smile even on the darkest days." Thomas smiled, touched and surprised by the tenderness in her confession. "And you? Do you still remember the promises we made under that tree?" Maya smiled sweetly. "I remember. All of them. Even the bracelet." There, in that small salon, among worn scissors and a quietly observant boy, two lives interrupted by time met again. And though nothing had yet been said about the future, something in that moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that blended past, present, and the very real possibility of starting over. It was nearly 8 o'clock at night when Maya turned the key in the barbershop door, closing up for the day. One by one, the warm yellow lights inside went dark, leaving the street lit only by the faint glow of the lampposts. Lucas had already gone home with the neighbor, as he often did when Maya had to stay late. Thomas was waiting outside, leaning discreetly against one of the shop's columns. He didn't say anything, he just smiled as she approached. Maya hesitated for a moment, as if still adjusting to the idea of him being there again. "There's a cafe open on the corner," she said, nodding with her chin. "At this hour, they only serve things that are strong and quiet." Thomas gave a soft laugh and nodded, walking beside her at an unhurried pace. The neighborhood was humble, with uneven sidewalks and modest storefronts, but it carried an honest dignity. As they stepped into the small cafe, the smell of warm bread and freshly brewed coffee wrapped around them like a shield against the cold night. They chose a table in the back, away from the noise, where the silence between them began to speak all the things they hadn't yet managed to say out loud. Maya stirred sugar into her cup slowly, as if the spoon were turning memories along with the coffee. "You disappeared," she said, not as an accusation, but with a painful weight in her voice. Thomas looked down. "They took me far away. My adoptive parents moved out of state. I was just a kid, Maya. I tried to come back." She nodded, like someone who already knew the story but needed to hear it from him. "I tried to find you too when I turned 18, but the orphanage had closed. The records were gone, archived, lost. I thought maybe you'd forgotten me." Thomas held his cup tightly, feeling the heat in his fingers as he met her gaze. "I never forgot you, not for a single day." A heavy silence fell between them. The cafe walls seemed to close in slightly around their table. Maya sighed, her eyes lingering somewhere in the past. "When I got pregnant with Lucas, I thought about looking for you, but I didn't know where to begin. And to be honest, I was afraid of what I'd find." Thomas furrowed his brow, confused. "You thought he might be mine?" She gave a small smile but shook her head. "No. His father disappeared before he ever got the chance to meet him. But when Lucas was born with those same brown eyes you had as a child, it was impossible not to think about everything we left behind." Thomas absorbed every word, a mixture of pain and relief stirring inside him. It felt as though her sentences were stitching up an old hole in his chest. "He's a special boy," he said sincerely. "There's something in his eyes, like he's already seen the world, just like you when we were kids." Maya smiled, though weariness lingered on her face. "Lucas grew up watching me fight the barbershop, the missed clients, the bills piling up. He never complained, never asked for more than I could give. And still, he believes in people. He thinks kindness can save the world. I think that part comes from you, even without knowing you." As the conversation came to a close and the waiter dimmed one of the lights to signal closing time, the two of them rose from the table slowly, without rush. Outside, the wind curled around the street corners, scattering dry leaves along the sidewalk. Thomas walked her to her front door, where Maya stopped and said softly, "I don't know what all this means, Thomas, but thank you for not turning away." He looked at her with tenderness. "I'm not going anywhere, Maya. Not this time." She smiled, and for the first time that night, her eyes weren't weighed down by the past. They were filled with an unexpected present that, perhaps, was meant to stay. 2 days after their conversation at the cafe, Thomas sent Maya a simple, respectful message. "I'd like to invite you and Lucas to dinner. No pressure, no expectations. Just an evening to talk, quietly. Would you accept?" Her reply came hours later, brief as well, but carrying something deeper. "Lucas would love that. So would I." Thomas felt an unfamiliar mix of nerves and excitement. He had attended countless business dinners at five-star restaurants, but none had ever made him feel this anxious. On the night they'd arranged, Thomas chose a cozy restaurant in Lincoln Park, a place known not for its luxury, but for its warm and intimate atmosphere. He reserved a table by the window, where they could see the soft glow of the streetlights and the gentle rhythm of pedestrians passing by. He arrived early, ordered a light red wine, and waited with a flutter in his stomach that felt almost boyish. When Maya and Lucas arrived, time seemed to slow. She wore a simple, elegant gray coat, and Lucas, dressed in a plaid shirt with eyes sparkling with curiosity, held tightly to his mother's hand. The waiter led them to their table, and for the first few minutes, their conversation stayed on light topics. Lucas's school, the salon's daily routine, the board games he liked to play. Thomas watched Maya with discreet admiration. She spoke with clarity, calmly, and smiled more often than he expected. There was something quietly captivating about her simplicity, a strength that didn't need to be spoken, only felt. When Lucas got up to go to the restroom, Thomas took the opportunity to bring up something he had been carrying with him for years. "Do you remember the book you used to read to me at the orphanage? The one with the blue cover, about constellations?" Maya smiled, surprised. I do. I could barely read back then, but you always asked me to read it again. Said you wanted to memorize the sky. Thomas laughed, visibly moved. I think I did. I bought that book years later just to have it near me. Maya looked at him with a mix of tenderness and disbelief. You held on to all that? He nodded. Maya, I didn't move on from that part of my life. I just buried it. But I never forgot. She looked away for a moment, as if reorganizing old feelings. I buried it too, she said softly. It was easier to pretend it was just a small chapter. But now, seeing you, watching Lucas around you, it all came back, like it had just been waiting. When Lucas returned to the table holding a leaf he'd found on the ground, saying it looked like a fallen star, both adults smiled as if they'd just awakened from an old dream. Dinner continued with a gentle lightness. Thomas ordered dessert for Lucas vanilla ice cream with warm fudge, and the boy, between spoonfuls, asked, You were my mom's best friend when she was little, right? The directness of the question touched Thomas deeply. Maya, surprised, looked at her son, who continued, She told me about the boy with the bracelet and the promise. I've always wanted to meet you. The silence that followed was broken by Thomas's emotional smile. Well, I guess you've met me now. Lucas reached out to shake his hand like a grown-up, and Thomas gripped it firmly. It was more than just a polite gesture. It was a silent pact. Maya watched the scene with eyes full of emotion, but also with a serene peace she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time in years, the word family began to make sense again. Not yet spoken out loud, but quietly forming between bites of food, shared memories, and the fragile hope of something new. The following Saturday, Thomas picked up Maya and Lucas in the morning without saying exactly where he was taking them. He simply asked them to wear comfortable clothes and trust him. The sky over Chicago was overcast, with heavy clouds that looked ready to weep at any moment, but the mild air felt like an invitation to reflection. Maya, both suspicious and curious, didn't press for answers. Lucas, on the other hand, excited as always, fired off questions from the back seat, trying to guess what surprise awaited them. They drove through older neighborhoods until they reached the south side of the city, where quieter streets held stories long forgotten by time. When they parked, Maya instantly recognized the red brick facade, now weathered and with boarded-up windows. It was the old orphanage. The building was decommissioned, surrounded by overgrown weeds, yet still imposing. She stepped out of the car in silence, eyes fixed on the structure. Thomas walked over slowly. I got permission from the city for a quick visit. I wasn't sure if you'd want to come, but I thought maybe it would matter. Maya nodded, still silent, her eyes welling without resistance. Lucas held his mother's hand and looked around curiously. To him, it was just an old building, but to the two adults, it was a time capsule waiting to be opened. As they stepped inside, the smell of mold and aged wood filled the air, and their footsteps echoed through the empty hallways. Thomas led them past faded walls now covered in graffiti and scars of abandonment, until they reached a small room in the back, the very place where, decades earlier, he and Maya had taken their only picture together. She recognized it instantly. Despite the dust, the shape of the windows, the broken bookshelf in the corner, and the faded rug were all still there. Maya brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back tears. Thomas stepped closer and, with near-reverent care, pulled out the old photo from a folder now laminated and handed it to her. It was here, he said softly. Remember the smell of the paint? The days you used to read to me in that corner. Maya touched the wall like she was greeting an old friend. I remember everything, Thomas. We never forget the place where we were children, or the one who held our hand. Lucas watched everything with growing attention, as if beginning to grasp the silent magnitude of the moment. You lived here? He asked, his eyes wide. Maya knelt in front of him. Yes, sweetheart. Mommy grew up here, and this is where I met Thomas. He was my best friend. When everything was hard, He made me believe the world out there could be beautiful. Lucas, with the purity of someone who understands more than words can express, smiled and simply said, "Now I know why your eyes shine when you talk about him." Thomas moved closer and knelt too. "Lucas, this place was part of our story. But the most beautiful part is that it didn't end here. Because now you're part of it too." The boy smiled and hugged them both tightly, as if trying to piece the past together into a brand new frame. There, in that forgotten space among the ruins of what was once a shelter, three hearts found one another. And for the first time, they formed something no one expected to find in that empty building. An invisible home, built from memories and a present finally ready to bloom. The week following their visit to the old orphanage, Thomas spent several of his evenings immersed in memories. In one of them, he recalled a particularly vivid moment. Maya, sitting on the cold dormitory floor, flipping through an illustrated astronomy book with him. Though she couldn't understand the complex text, she made up stories for each constellation, turning the stars into magical characters. Those simple moments had become cherished sanctuaries in his memory. And now, seeing that same curious sparkle in Lucas's eyes, Thomas was inspired to give something back. On Friday, he showed up at the barbershop unexpectedly at closing time, carrying a box wrapped in dark blue paper, hand-decorated with golden stars. Lucas, who was sweeping the floor with a small broom, paused when he saw Thomas walk in. "For me?" he asked, pointing to the box with a wide grin. Thomas crouched down and nodded. "Yes, champ, but only if you promise to take good care of it." Maya, counting the register, glanced over with a mix of surprise and caution, but chose to stay silent and observe. Lucas tore the wrapping slowly, almost reverently, until the contents were revealed. A hardcover book filled with vivid images of galaxies, planets, and constellations. But there was more. Inside the box was a star projector, a small globe that, when turned on, would cast star-shaped lights across the ceiling. The boy's jaw dropped. This is the sky in my room?" Thomas laughed. "Something like that. So you never forget to look up. And so you remember that even when it's dark, the stars are always there." Maya knelt beside her son, gently touching the cover of the book. She recognized it instantly from the same edition she used to read as a child. "It's the same," she whispered, moved. "You remembered." Thomas looked at her, smiling in a way that said more than words ever could. "How could I forget?" For the first time, Maya didn't look away. There was a deep respect in her eyes, but also something new beginning to blossom. Trust, maybe. Or simply the quiet relief of knowing he wasn't trying to impress them, but rather to share honest pieces of his own story. Lucas ran outside to show his gift to the neighbor, leaving Maya and Thomas alone for a moment. "He's going to keep this for the rest of his life," she said, still holding the book. "I know because I did too." Thomas nodded, glancing toward the door Lucas had just exited. "He's amazing, Maya. There's a light in him, and I want to be part of that even if it's just in small ways." She took a deep breath, as if carefully weighing her words. "You're already doing more than you realize, Thomas. Just take it slow. He's already drawn to you, and if you leave, it'll be more than he can handle." Thomas felt the weight of her words, but also the privilege of hearing them. He stepped closer gently and said, "I'm not here to pass through. I'm here to stay." Maya didn't reply right away. She just smiled, reserved, yet with something unmistakably new in her expression. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the quiet beginning of something she was finally starting to believe could be real. That night, after putting Lucas to bed with the star projector casting soft lights across the ceiling, Maya sat beside his bed longer than usual. She watched his peaceful face, gently illuminated by the shifting blue glow above, and felt her heart torn between gratitude and fear. Thomas's presence had become consistent, but it was that very consistency that began to unsettle her. It wasn't easy to accept tenderness when you'd spent so long holding yourself up, when every achievement had come through struggle, and every offer of help in the past had carried a hidden price. The next morning, Maya woke up with a heaviness in her chest. Memories from the past came rushing back. Lucas's father leaving, empty promises, the hardships she had faced alone with no one to share the weight of her pain. She had learned to be everything: mother, provider, counselor, and friend. And now, with Thomas offering his presence, his support, even his affection, something inside her was on high alert. Am I letting him in too much? She wondered. What if this is temporary? What if, in the end, it's just another chapter that ends without warning? In the days that followed, Maya grew more distant. She began replying to Thomas's messages more slowly, turning down his invitations with vague excuses, and avoiding meetups by claiming the salon was too busy or that Lucas needed help with his homework. Thomas, perceptive as always, noticed the change but didn't push. He knew when someone needed space, especially someone with wounds that hadn't fully healed. Instead of pressing her, he left a small bouquet outside the salon's sunflowers, just like the ones that used to bloom near the orphanage yard, with a simple note, "I'm still here." That evening, when Maya found the note attached to the wrapping, her eyes stung with emotion. She sat on the salon's small couch, staring at the flowers for a long time. Deep down, she knew she was running, not because of a lack of feeling, but because of the fear of forming a bond that might break again. She didn't know how to teach Lucas to handle another disappearance. And yet, she couldn't deny how much he had blossomed since Thomas had entered their lives. The boy laughed more, asked different kinds of questions, and read with greater enthusiasm. The sparkle in Lucas's eyes said everything Maya was still afraid to admit. The next morning, while organizing the salon shelves before her first client arrived, Maya made a decision. She picked up her phone and sent a short but honest message. "I'm sorry I pulled away. I'm trying to figure out how to let someone stay without feeling like I'm losing my footing. I still want you here. I just need time to trust it." Thomas replied just minutes later, his words filled with the same gentle understanding he always carried. "I'm not in a hurry. I'm not here to take anything. I just want to walk beside you, whenever you're ready." And in that brief exchange, something inside Maya settled. For the first time in a long while, someone was offering to stay without asking for anything in return. Thomas understood the message between the lines of Maya's text. She wasn't looking for grand words, promises, or instant solutions. What she wanted was presence: quiet, steady, unwavering, someone who stayed without fanfare, simply by being there. And that was exactly what he intended to offer. Instead of trying to win Maya over with luxury or showy gestures, he chose to speak in the language she understood best, the language of small details. He knew that trust, for someone like her, couldn't be asked for. It had to be built, step by step, brick by brick. The following week, while Maya was out running errands with suppliers, a small renovation team arrived at the barbershop. Not to change everything, but to restore what had worn down. They fixed the perpetually leaking sink, gave the stained mirrors new life, and repainted the facade, preserving the original sign. Thomas had arranged everything quietly through a neighborhood contact and had left clear instructions. "Nothing is to be touched without her approval. We're just here to restore what's already beautiful." When Maya arrived and saw the activity, she froze on the sidewalk for a few seconds. A longtime customer, sitting at the door, smiled and said, "Your friend? The one who's always with the boy. He sent them." Said this barbershop was part of his story too. Maya stepped inside and walked slowly through the space. There was no excess, no showiness, just care. Fresh paint on the walls, polished floors, and the old chairs repaired with the same vintage upholstery, keeping its soul intact. On the counter, a toolbox had been left behind, alongside a handwritten letter from Thomas. The handwriting was steady, slightly slanted, and the message was simple. "You've spent years taking care of everything on your own. I thought maybe now someone could take care of something for you without taking away your space." just strengthening what you've built." As she finished reading, Maya held the letter with trembling hands. This wasn't about charity. It was about respect. Thomas wasn't trying to fix her life. He was honoring something she loved, in her way, at her pace. And to Maya, that meant more than any expensive gift ever could. As she organized her tools, she noticed even the cracked mirror in the back had been replaced with a new one, identical frame, and all as if someone had truly paid attention to what mattered. When Lucas got home from school and saw the refreshed salon, he exclaimed, "Wow, Mom, your barbershop looks like it's in a movie." She smiled and pulled him into a tight hug. "It looks like our movie, sweetheart." Thomas didn't show up that day, nor the next. He didn't need to. His gesture had spoken for him. In the days that followed, Maya began to see Thomas differently. Not just as the childhood friend she had rediscovered, nor as the kind-hearted businessman who had entered her life, but as someone who knew how to love gently, who respected her boundaries and still gave the best of himself without demanding anything in return. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't have to carry everything alone. And strangely, that idea no longer felt so terrifying. That autumn afternoon, with clouds hanging heavy with what was to come, Maya insisted on walking downtown. She needed to breathe, to move, to feel the world around her in motion, even if everything inside her was still. In her purse, she carried the letter Thomas had left with the barbershop renovation. She had read it so many times she knew it by heart. But something about that note wouldn't let her throw it away or tuck it away for good. It was as if she still needed to make peace with it before deciding on her next step. While waiting for the light to change at the corner of Monroe and State Street, thick drops began to fall. First scattered, then steady and deliberate. Maya ran beneath the awning of an old, shuttered movie theater and stood there, watching the city transform into a mirror. People dashed through the streets, cars slowed down, umbrellas opened like black flowers along the sidewalks. She hadn't noticed Thomas approaching from across the street until she heard his voice, breathless, smiling. "I always seem to find you in the middle of storms." She laughed, surprised, brushing her wet hair aside. "I think the rain follows me. Or maybe it's just always wherever I am." Thomas stepped closer carefully, not wanting to interrupt her moment. He was soaked to the shoulders but didn't seem to care. "I was heading to the shop to bring you something, but I didn't need to." Maya looked at him, eyes carrying the same question that had lingered in her for days. "Why do you do all of this, Thomas? Why don't you get tired?" "I hesitate, I pull back, I doubt. And you just keep going." He took a deep breath. The sound of the rain created a cinematic backdrop. "Because I understand," he answered honestly. "You built your life alone. You had to be strong when no one else was around. And now, you're afraid that if someone helps you carry that weight, everything will collapse. I see that, and I don't blame you. I just want to be here, because I still love you, Maya." The words came out unplanned, unpolished. They just happened. Simple, bare, real. Maya stood silently for a few seconds, her heart pounding and eyes brimming. The last time someone had said those words to her, they disappeared the very next day. But there was Thomas, soaked, standing in the rain, offering nothing grand, just something she hadn't been given in a long time. The truth. "You have no idea how much that scares me," she said, her voice low and trembling. "But you also have no idea how much it heals me." Thomas reached out his hand, not to pressure, just to invite. She took it gently, and that's how they stayed. Hand in hand in the rain, no umbrellas, no guarantees, but with a feeling that was finally beginning to take shape. The world kept rushing around them, but for a few quiet moments, Maya and Thomas were in the right time. Not the past that had separated them, not the future that still intimidated them, but the present, which at last was bringing them together. Christmas was approaching, and with it came a different energy flowing through the city. Lights in the windows, storefronts trimmed with gold, and slightly off-key children's choirs in crowded squares. For Thomas, it was the first time in years that the season didn't feel purely commercial or painfully lonely. For the first time, he didn't dream of escaping abroad to avoid the emptiness. He wanted to stay. He wanted to be near Maya and Lucas. He wanted to experience the kind of Christmas he'd never had. Not the elegant one, but the real one. A few days before Christmas Eve, Thomas sent a handwritten invitation, folded into 3 parts and placed inside a deep blue envelope, which he left with the doorman at Maya's building. At the top of the invitation, there was only one sentence. Nothing grand, just an evening with the ones who matter. Maya read it in silence, with Lucas at her side. He smiled immediately. "Can we go, Mom? Please, we could bring your homemade bread. He's gonna love it." Maya hesitated, but deep down she already knew the answer. She looked at her son and saw in his smile a decision that had been made long before she realized it. On Christmas Eve, they arrived together at Thomas's house. Nothing about it screamed luxury, at least not that night. The once silent and impersonal mansion had taken on a new warmth, decorated with handmade touches and a tall Christmas tree adorned not with designer ornaments, but with crafts Thomas and Lucas had made over the past few weeks. Cardboard stars, felt balls, and chains of colored paper. Maya stopped in the doorway of the living room, moved. "You two did all this?" Thomas, walking in from the kitchen with an apron dusted in flour, smiled. He picked the colors. "I just followed orders." Dinner was simple but filled with meaning. Maya brought her homemade bread, just as Lucas had suggested, and Thomas cooked a dish he had learned from his adoptive mother, a quiet tribute to the past he had finally chosen to embrace. During the meal, the conversation flowed with ease. They laughed over orphanage stories, childhood mishaps, and the silly made-up words Maya and Thomas once used to speak in code so adults wouldn't understand. Lucas listened, wide-eyed, absorbing every memory like pages from an old book in which he, slowly but surely, was becoming a part. After dinner, they gathered in the living room. Lucas dashed off to his makeshift bedroom in the house and returned with an envelope decorated in colored pencil. He handed it to Thomas, his cheeks flushed with nerves. "I made this for you." Inside was a drawing in childlike lines, but filled with meaning. Him, Maya, and Thomas standing hand in hand in front of the Christmas tree, with the word "us" written at the top. Thomas's eyes lit up, and he knelt in front of the boy and hugged him tightly. "This is the best Christmas present I've ever received." Maya watched the scene. Her heart tugged between emotion and caution, but in that moment, something finally gave way inside her. It was no longer about the fear of relying on someone. It was about realizing that, sometimes, life surprises us with unexpected kindness. When Thomas sat down beside her again, she lightly touched his hand and whispered, "You're becoming the home we never had." He didn't answer. He simply squeezed her hand gently. That night, beneath the soft glow of the Christmas tree and the gentle sound of rain beginning to fall, there was no need for definitions. Without saying so, they had already become a new family. It was the first Sunday of January when Thomas woke earlier than usual. The sky was still gray, and a light fog draped the city like a quiet veil. On the desk in his room rested the old photograph of him and Maya, taken at the orphanage so many years ago. He gazed at it for a long moment, 2 young faces, shy smiles, hands clasped in front of a crooked tree in a worn-down yard. The image that had endured through time, holding a promise he wasn't sure he still believed in, now made sense. It was complete. At breakfast, Thomas told Maya and Lucas that he had planned something special. Nothing extravagant, just a visit. Without revealing the destination, he drove them to a newly opened community park, built precisely on the land where the old orphanage once stood. The crumbling building had been demolished, but part of its structure had been preserved and incorporated into the space as a tribute to the past. A new oak tree had been planted in the exact spot where the tree from the original photograph once grew. As they approached the park's central clearing, Maya felt her heart begin to race. There were wooden benches, a small playground, and a glass panel etched with brief stories of the children who had once lived there, including theirs. In one of the frames, digitized and restored, was their photo, accompanied by a simple caption. They promised to find each other again. And they did. Maya brought her hand to her mouth, unable to hold back the tears. "You did this?" she asked, her voice choked. Thomas nodded. "Actually, we did. This story belongs to us." Lucas ran around the new oak tree, thrilled by the idea of planting roots where before there had only been memories. In a spontaneous moment, Thomas pulled his phone from his pocket and called out to them. "Come here. Let's take a new photo. Same place, new hands." Maya laughed through her tears and reached for his hand. Lucas darted into the middle. The photo was taken with the morning light breaking through the mist, softening their features as if even nature wanted to preserve that moment forever. Later, back at home, Thomas printed the photo on matte paper and placed it beside the old one in a double picture frame on the bookshelf. On one side, 2 children in an orphanage. On the other, 3 people standing in front of a new tree. It was more than a side-by-side comparison. It was a circle closing, and at the same time widening. Maya looked at him with a peaceful smile. "You know what I see here?" she asked, pointing to the photos. "The same thing in both, hope. Only now, we have a place to come back to." Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and for a moment, they simply stood there, quietly taking in the images. Lucas, lying on the rug, played with a box of colored pencils and began drawing something new. When Maya asked what it was, he answered without hesitation. "A house with a star on top, because now we have that too." And in that childlike simplicity, there was all the truth they needed. A new family had been formed not by chance, but by reunion. Not rushed, but in time. Not from what was lost, but from what, against all odds, had remained.